Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining me for this Mastering Your Qualitative Methodology webinar. My name is Rachel. I am a senior research mentor. I do the qualitative work here at Statistics Solutions. I'm also joined by Isades, who will be helping me out in the background just with any little technology tidbits. But she will also be available to answer any questions that come in during the webinar about Statistics Solutions, about our company and the services that we provide. This webinar is being recorded and it will be available to participants tomorrow along with a copy of the slideshow. So if you have questions related to either the content of the webinar or to Statistics Solutions and what we do, you can go ahead and type those into the question and answer box. Like I said, Isades is here to help me field questions about the company and the services that we provide during the webinar. Questions related to content about the webinar, qualitative methodology, and research design. I will leave those until the end, and we will have a question and answer session at the end where I'll read each question aloud and answer it so that everyone can benefit from the responses. So again, I'm Rachel. I'm a senior qualitative research mentor here at Statistics Solutions. We are a full service dissertation consulting company. So we are really here to help you out with any stage of the research process. So if you are just beginning to develop your topic, we can help you out there, and we can help you all the way through to the end to get you prepped for your dissertation defense. So you'll see our contact information on the first and last slides, and it'll also be available to you at the bottom of each slide moving forward. So we do offer a complimentary consultation. You can go ahead and get that scheduled using this link. You can email info@statisticsolutions.com, and the complimentary consultation is really designed to get a better feel for the research that you are conducting or planning to conduct and what services we might be able to provide to you. So again, this is Mastering Your Qualitative Methodology. And so the first thing I want to do is kind of talk about the sections of your methods chapter. And for a lot of you, the methods chapter will be your chapter 3 if you're conducting more of a standard 5-chapter dissertation. For some of you, this might look a little bit different. Some may have longer dissertations where chapter 3 is not the methods chapter, but if I use them interchangeably, please know that when I refer to chapter 3, I'm referring to the methods chapter. So this is a compilation of what I have seen most commonly asked for in terms of sections from different schools. Okay, so my clients come to me with often some kind of template or checklist, and these are the sections that are frequently required of the methods chapter. Now, this doesn't mean that for you and your program and your school, these are all required. And if that's not the case, then that's fine. You can ignore them. But if you are getting very little guidance from your school, from your chair, from your committee members, if you make sure that you include each of these sections, you will have a solid and complete methods chapter. So the introduction, the research design, including your rationale for that design, your role as the researcher, the methodology section, issues of trustworthiness, and the summary. So those are the main points that we will hit today in this presentation as well. In your introductory section, you want to restate the purpose of the study. You will do this verbatim, okay? You can copy and paste what you have stated in chapter 1, if it appears in chapter 2. Anywhere that you talk about the purpose of this study, it needs to be written verbatim. Okay. Otherwise, it may seem kind of nitpicky, but changing any of those words can actually change the meaning and implications of your study. And we don't want to do that, right? There's one purpose for your study. So it needs to be stated exactly the same way every time. Okay, and then in the introduction, you'll also preview the sections of the chapter. So again, those are most likely going to include those sections that I highlighted in the previous slide. Okay, so simple introduction, again, restate the purpose of the study, preview each of the sections. For those of you who have been with me in other webinars, you know that I am a big fan of hold your reader's hand, right? Nothing should come as a surprise. Everything should flow logically. And so to that end, we want to make sure that each section unfolds in a way that is very clear and logical to your reader, who is going to be, you know, ultimately your chair and your committee, who will determine if you pass or not. Okay, so think clear, think holding the reader's hand. In your research design section, you'll want to restate your research questions that you'll often have presented in your introduction chapter, your first chapter. Okay, so again, this is something that you'll want to copy and paste verbatim. No changing the words here. Don't get creative. This isn't the place for it. Just restate the research questions exactly as they appeared anywhere else in your first two chapters. Okay. Then you also want to identify and define what it is that you are studying. Okay, what you're looking at. So if it's, you know, phenomenology, that would be the phenomenon, or the case, if it's a case study, really, you know, what is the central concept that you're studying? Okay, you want to identify and define that and talk about it. And then you want to identify the tradition, which I am going to assume, since you're in this, is maybe qualitative, or you're leaning toward qualitative. Okay, so qualitative research tradition and the design, the specific design. So it might be case study, it might be phenomenology, you might be conducting an ethnography. Okay, any of those designs. And what you need to be thinking about here is demonstrating your familiarity with qualitative research designs. So I'm going to talk about this in terms of qualitative. It might be the case that you need to at least acknowledge that you know what a quantitative tradition and some designs are, okay, but that may not be the case. What you want to do is talk about what qualitative studies are, why they are useful, why they are most useful to address your research problem, purpose, and questions. Okay, and then you want to build the case that the specific qualitative design you plan to use is also the most appropriate. So this is justification. You're building the case that one of these designs is more appropriate than the others. And to do this, you need to show that you are well acquainted, well familiar with several different research designs. Okay. So the question then is, why use a qualitative design? Okay. If you are looking at conducting interviews, perhaps observations, perhaps document analysis, perhaps any combination of those. Anytime you have textual data, this is probably a good indication that you will be using a qualitative research design. Key terms that sort of point to a qualitative design are things like perspectives and experiences. If you are exploring participants' perspectives of an experience, of a phenomenon, okay, this is where you will probably use a qualitative design. Data collection, as I said, can include things like interviews with participants. It can include focus groups with multiple participants at one time. It can include document analysis, observations. It might entail extended participant observation at a field site. Okay, so this list is certainly not exhaustive, but it is the data collection methods that I most commonly see. Okay, oftentimes in qualitative studies, our goal is not necessarily to generalize to a wider population. Okay, we assume that our findings probably are unique to our participants. There may be some transferability, but that's not really the goal here. Okay, in the same way that sampling a population in a quantitative study would be to generalize. We don't test hypotheses, so we don't write our research questions in terms of hypothesis testing. There's no null or alternate hypothesis here. We just write research questions that we try to address. And we're not quantifying results. And this is, sometimes this does come into play a little bit, the quantification. There are some types of qualitative designs where you can quantify a bit, but that's not overall the goal of a qualitative design. So I see really 3 research designs very commonly, very frequently in my work with doctoral students. Those are case studies, phenomenological studies, and generic qualitative design studies. Grounded theory and ethnography, I will touch on a bit, but they are less frequently used and have some pretty specific applications. So I'll cover each of these because they are so commonly used and because I do see them so frequently in my work. My clients use these a lot, but a case study is the first. These are in absolutely no particular order though. Case studies are really good when we want to explore an example of something over time in a really in-depth way. So it might be an example that is atypical of a concept. It might be, or atypical of a case. It might be that you see, you're in education and you see that all of these different high schools have implemented a new curriculum, and all of the high schools that have implemented the curriculum have seen really good results in terms of student achievement and improvement, except one. Okay, so that might be an atypical case. What's going on then that is leading this particular school to not see the same results as these other schools? Okay, it could provide a counterpoint case or a case that sort of takes what we know in a new direction. But the idea here is you have a specific example of something and you're really looking in depth. It's that in-depth analysis from lots of different directions. And when I say directions, I mean data collection techniques. We use multiple data collection techniques or methods in a case study. It's not just interviewing. It's not just document analysis. It's not just observations. You might be using all 3. Okay. First, this provides a point of triangulation, data source triangulation. But think about if you really want an in-depth analysis of a case or of multiple cases, then we need to examine that from all angles. Okay. So it's not enough to just ask the teachers at that high school what's going on. Maybe we want to look at their lesson plans. Maybe we want to conduct some classroom observations as well, okay, to really get a whole sense of the case. And so the goal then is to generate this really rich description based on the in-depth analysis of the case and examining those themes that emerged from the study of that case, okay? One case or more cases might be bound by some uniting factor. Okay, so if it's a multiple case study, and I'm not going to get real in depth here on that, but a multiple case study, you would be looking at, as it sounds, more than one cases. And when I say bound by some uniting factor, I mean, if we take our example again of high school classrooms that have implemented this curriculum or high schools that have implemented this curriculum, maybe let's say it's not just one class that's doing poorly. It's 3 different classes across 3 different high schools, but all of the other high schools in the district, I don't know if we pretend there are 15, so 3 out of 15 aren't doing well, then each of those might be a case, but they're bound by this commonality, which is they have implemented this curriculum, right? And they're not seeing the results that other schools are. Okay. Phenomenological studies are another really commonly used qualitative research design. And I see these a lot. They are really psychological in nature. And I do want to sort of impart that because it's important to keep this in mind. Okay. They are rooted in psychology. They are rooted in philosophy. And so there's this deeper psychological element to them that is often missed in this design. Phenomenology is good for studying the lived experiences of participants. So how participants experience a phenomenon and how they make meaning of that phenomenon, how they assign meaning to the phenomenon. And so this is usually done through in-depth interviews. So unlike a case study where you're using multiple data collection methods, phenomenology, the real key data collection method is the in-depth interview. And I am talking about an hour or more and possibly multiple interviews with participants. It generates a lot of data, but this is how you get at that good, rich data and understanding of the phenomenon and how participants make meaning of that. Okay, so then the idea here is to illuminate the commonalities. What is it like? What do participants share who have all been through this experience? Okay, and a lot of times we sort of think of it as finding the essence. What are the key sort of features, the core structure of that phenomenon, of that experience? Okay, different phenomenological designs. There is some differentiation here that you should be aware of, and this has to do with interpretation or lack of interpretation. There are some types of phenomenological studies where the interpretation is really not the goal. It's strictly looking at the essence of the phenomenon. In other cases, it might be that interpretation of the phenomenon is part of the study as well. Okay. And, it just which design you use has to make sense in the context, again, of your own study, of your own research problem purpose and research questions. So, like I said, case studies and phenomenological studies are those that I see most frequently, but there are occasions when a problem, a purpose, and research questions do not fit squarely into either a case study or a phenomenological study. Okay, and if this is the case, this is when I usually suggest a generic qualitative design. Okay, do not let the name fool you, and please don't let it fool your committee members and your chair. I have heard so many people over the years tell me, that their chair doesn't like the idea of a generic design because of the term generic. I think it has sort of automatic negative connotations and misperceptions about it. And that is not what it means. It doesn't mean less good or anything like that in qualitative research. What it does mean is that it is a really flexible design that you can use when your study isn't quite a case study, when your study isn't quite a phenomenological study. Okay, so, when I talked about phenomenological studies and how the focus is really inward on the meaning making associated with an experience or a phenomenon, when the focus is more on the experience and not how people make sense of the experience, a generic qualitative design might be the best fit. And this can be useful with mixed methods designs, but it's cool because it allows you as the researcher some flexibility in terms of which data collection techniques are the most appropriate for your study. It allows you some flexibility in terms of which data analysis plan you would like to use. Okay, there are some designs where the particular design and analysis is all laid out for you based on that design. Okay, the generic qualitative design opens that up so that you can kind of pick and choose. Okay, when I say pick and choose, I don't mean in a way that's like, oh, I think I'd like to do this and this and this and this. It's not like that. Everything is driven by your problem, purpose, and research questions. Okay, so again, you are aligning everything, you're holding your researcher's hand. Everything has to make sense according to your problem, purpose, and research questions. Okay. So again, the generic qualitative design is helpful because it yields this outer world understanding, outer world content. The focus is not inward, it's outward. What is the experience like? Okay. I also like to use, I know it's a little bit dated right now. Those of you who are working with, say, a 5-year, time span for articles, this is, we're into 6 years away from this now. I guess it wasn't just a couple of years ago, 2015, but Percy and colleagues, this particular article, I think, makes a really good case for generic qualitative design and is a really good accessible jumping off place if you feel like a generic qualitative design is maybe the best fit for your study. And certainly I think is very helpful for helping to justify such a design. Now, the two less common qualitative designs that I see are grounded theory and ethnography. So grounded theory is really helpful when we don't know a whole lot about a topic, okay? It is also not for novice researchers, okay? So at the doctoral level, this can be a little bit tricky. The idea here is to generate theory. So instead of beginning with a theoretical framework, which is part of most qualitative designs and most qualitative studies, grounded theory doesn't work like this. It doesn't employ in the same way a theoretical framework because the idea is to generate theory from the perspectives of participants, okay? The theory is grounded in your data. So this is done through a lot of different data collection techniques, interviews, extended field work, text document analysis, a lot of writing, memoing, and theoretical saturation. So getting to the point where you have thoroughly exhausted all data in your study, okay? So that, when you're talking to more participants, you're not learning new information. And so, like I said, the goal is to produce theory, to generate theory based on your data. It doesn't start with data. It doesn't start with theory that you will use to, frame your study. Okay, so it works in a different way and produces a broader explanation of whatever the concept is that you're studying: process, action, interaction. Okay. The thing about grounded theory also is that it can take a very long time. Which in PhD terms can translate to taking a lot of money. Okay, because it's a constant iterative back and forth process between data and analysis and data collection and recruiting new participants. It all kind of happens at the same time. So it may be hard to identify an ending point in a grounded theory study if you're just starting out. Ethnography is also a pretty specific qualitative design used a lot in anthropology and sociology. And it's good for understanding a problem within the space of culture and society. Okay, so how that problem relates within that context. Ethnography provides a really holistic look at a problem. So networks of people, networks of institutions, how people are grouped socially, all of that is taken as important when understanding the context. So it's this idea that, one change affects a whole lot of other things, and we need to understand those in order to understand the problem. So ethnography, again, draws on a lot of data collection techniques that I've just mentioned: interviews, observations. It can include, document analysis, anything like that. But it also makes use of extended field work. And when I say extended, I mean, historically, it's been minimum of a year of field work. That is changing quite a bit, but the expectation that you would spend a long time, probably at least 6 months, collecting data in the field is still there. Participant observation, which is a little bit different from just regular observation because you are participating, right? So the idea is that to understand someone else and their way of life, you walk in their shoes. That's the participant observation part. And other conversations. Okay, you take part in daily life with another group. And it produces an in-depth account, which is also called an ethnography. So ethnography is the research design. It's also the product of this research problem from the perspective of participants and situated in the larger cultural context. So, after the discussion of your research design, you also want to talk about your role as the researcher. Are you an observer? Are you a participant? Are you both? Where do you fit in the research? Okay. And some people may take issue with this, but I firmly believe that even in quantitative studies, the researcher plays an active role. No research is free from bias. This is like I said, some people might take issue with this, but the best that we can do is to identify and acknowledge what these biases may be, the biases that we bring to our research. This is why we need to include this role of the researcher section. Okay. It also helps us to identify potential conflicts of interest. Are there power dynamics between you as the researcher and your participants? Are you a principal? Are you conducting your study with teachers at your school? Okay. That may not fly through an IRB, but it might be the case that you are approved to conduct this research, but you need to describe how your role might impact this. Okay. So conflicts of interest, power dynamics. What are the biases that you bring to your study? We all bring biases. We can't avoid it. We are human beings and we are working with human beings. Okay, so what are those biases and how you will mitigate these? What are you going to do to keep them at bay? Okay, and any other ethical issues. Okay, so again, do you work at the study site? Are your participants known to you? What will you do about that? Okay, to limit any ethical issues. In your methodology section, you'll want to talk about your participants. So the larger population from which you will draw the sample. So what group of people overall? are you looking at for your study? Okay. Your sampling strategy. This is going to be very different from a quantitative study. Okay. Whereas in quantitative studies, we often use random sampling because it helps us ensure that the sample is representative of the larger population. Again, that's part of that ability to generalize to the larger population that we are less interested in qualitative research. We use non-random sampling most often. We call this, you'll see it purposive, you'll also see purposeful sampling. The idea here is that in qualitative studies, we're often looking for people who do share similar characteristics. You know, think about it. If you are studying, you know, experiences of women survivors of breast cancer who have been through some kind of experimental treatment, you want to ensure that all of your participants meet those criteria. Okay, so by nature, it's not random. Okay, you'll list the inclusion and exclusion criteria. So what are those characteristics that people must meet to participate in your study? Okay, how will you verify that people meet those characteristics? Are you going to have a phone call with them and ask them? Are you going to ask them to take a short, maybe online survey to verify that they meet those characteristics? So these are things that you need to think about and include in this section. The number of participants. And if you're doing a multiple case study, the number of cases. Okay, and again, all of this must be justified, okay, based on problem, purpose, and research question, and by drawing from other literature related to yours, and you know what other people have done. Okay, so your number of participants, the steps that you will take to identify, contact, and recruit participants. And I know that this can sound really boring, and it is written in a way that does seem very formulaic. Okay, it's, you know, it's not bullet points, but it feels like bullet points. It's like bullet points in narrative form. But again, part of the clear, logical, concise writing and holding your reader's hand is something that you want to really keep your eyes on as you're working through this. So, all of those steps. How do you identify, contact, and recruit your participant? And the size of the sample and its relationship to data saturation, or that point where you are not receiving new information, you're not collecting new data with more participants. Okay, and so how that relates to sample size. You also want to include in your methodology section something on your instrumentation. So for any data collection technique that you are using, you need to describe that instrument. So if it's an interview protocol, you need to describe it and then refer to it as an appendix in your dissertation. You need to describe if you're using an observation sheet or some kind of sheet for document analysis as well. You will want to identify if you are creating your own instrument or if you're using one that's already published. And then, of course, if you're using one that's already published, acknowledge that you have permission to use that. If you're conducting a document review, identifying the source and how you will verify that source for accuracy. Okay. Basically, what you want to do is show how each source of data, and again, it may be that you are conducting interviews and that's your only data collection technique. And if that's what makes sense for your study, then that's perfectly appropriate. But for each of those data sources, you want to show how the data you collect using that source, okay, will address your research question or questions. in your procedures section of your methodology, so you can refer back to your instrumentation here, you want to, for each of the instruments, provide the following details. Okay. And again, this list may not be fully applicable to you and your school, your department, but if you include all of this, you will have a full and complete methods chapter. So you want to talk about where you will be collecting data. Okay. And, right now, these days, it might be, in your home office, or it might be at a private room in the library, wherever you plan to collect data. Who will collect data? And that's most likely you, but you might be one of those lucky souls who has a research assistant. And if that's the case, it might be your research assistant who is conducting interviews with participants. And if so, you talk about that in this section. The frequency of data collection events. So how often will you conduct classroom observations, for example? The duration of data collection events. Do you expect to conduct ethnographic field work for 8 months? Okay. How you will record your data, right? And any contingency plans in case of attrition. This always happens. We have to plan for it. Okay. A lot of this chapter is sort of thinking through alternate scenarios, right? What might happen and how are we going to handle that when it does? Somebody drops out of the study. How are you planning to recruit someone else to replace them? So any contingency plans you'll want to outline in this section. Debriefing procedures for your participants. So, how do you plan to follow up with them, talk to them, at the end of the study? Are you conducting any member checking or transcript verification? Okay, and how do you plan to handle that? So you want to outline and identify each of these and describe how you will do it, how you will accomplish each of these in your study. And then your data analysis plan. So for each data type, you want to describe how those data are connected to your research. So how, again, those data will address the research question or research questions. It can be helpful to maybe lay this out in a table format to kind of think through the alignment between problem, purpose, research question, data collection technique, and data analysis plan. So, you want to outline what coding procedures you will use for your data, what type of analysis are you conducting, an interpretative phenomenological analysis. And so you're following that analysis plan. Are you doing a generic qualitative study? And so you'll follow a thematic analysis. Outline those procedures, okay, what you plan to do with your data, how you plan to analyze them, any software that you are going to use in your analysis, and how you will handle any discrepant cases. And these are those cases where one or two participants don't quite fit the pattern of other participants. So how does that factor into your analysis? We can't just toss them. Okay, they're not outliers, but we need to account for and acknowledge that sometimes people don't fit the patterns because they're people. And this can lead us to new avenues of research, or, allow us to sort of expand our thinking about those patterns that we thought were there originally. So talk about how you'll handle those. You'll want to include also a section on trustworthiness. Okay, so this is like validity and reliability in quantitative studies. We don't use that terminology in qualitative research. So we use something like issues of trustworthiness. There are 4: credibility, transferability, dependability, and confirmability. So, how confident can your reader be in the accuracy of your findings? Are your findings transferable or applicable to other contexts, maybe with a different population? okay, or maybe in a different geographical region? Are they dependable? If we replicate the study, can we expect to get similar results? And are the findings based as much as possible on the participants, not the researcher? Okay, so you can establish these 4 issues of trustworthiness through things like rich description. Okay, so providing a lot of detailed information such that someone could replicate a study, by using triangulation, which might involve using 2 or more data collection techniques that kind of act as a, how do they sort of converge around the same findings, an audit trail, using member checking. This list, triangulation, for example, even though I have it presented with credibility, triangulation can also help establish transferability, dependability, and confirmability. So the main thing is to think through in this section of your methods chapter, for each of these 4 aspects, you want to demonstrate to your chair and your committee that you understand what they are and how you plan to establish them in your own study. Okay. Finally, you'll talk about the ethical procedures inherent in your study. So any agreements that you have to gain access to participants and thus to data. So you will likely need IRB approval from your university's institutional review board. If you are conducting research with, let's go back to our school example, they might have a separate IRB procedure that you would need. Any site permissions, okay, where you're conducting your research. The treatment of human participants, okay? You basically think of this in terms of the Belmont Report, okay? And those fundamental ethical procedures. So permissions that you need in order to conduct the research, ethical considerations related to recruitment, okay? Making sure that you are keeping your participants and their data confidential. So this could be related to recruitment, something like, how will you ensure that you are not recruiting participants in public such that other people could maybe overhear that they are being recruited for your study? Ethical considerations related to data collection. Okay, so for example, how will you ensure that you're only collecting data related to your study? Okay, and then your treatment of data, maintaining confidentiality. Anonymity would be if you don't know your participants at all. And that's pretty hard to do in qualitative research. So we don't really talk about anonymity, but we talk about confidentiality. So how will you maintain your participants' data in a confidential way so that others don't have access to it? How will you secure your data and how will you destroy it after a period of time? Most schools require something around a 5-year period that you maintain your data for that long. And then after that, you're required to destroy the data. So how will you do that? Are they electronic files? Will you delete them and then empty your recycling bin on your computer? Will you shred physical data? Okay, so you have to think through each of these little aspects of your study. And just by way of helpful hints, the more detail you can put into the ethical procedures section of your methods chapter, the better shape you'll be in when you have to complete your IRB application, because you've already thought through these fundamental steps, because you will be required to redo all of this for that application. Your summary for chapter 3 should recap your main points, okay? Again, no surprises, right? We don't introduce new information here. We summarize the main points, we hold the reader's hand, and we recap how the methods and methodology, okay, so the what you'll do and the how you'll do it will address the problem, purpose, and research questions. Okay, and then transition to the next chapter. So some other helpful hints for writing your methods chapter. This chapter is one that I see, a lot of my clients struggle with because it feels overwhelming in a different way from your first two chapters. You have to think through and plan for something that you have not done yet. And I know a lot of us who are completing dissertations, who have completed a dissertation, we're so in our heads and so analytical that the what if really gets in the way. I totally understand that. I have been there. I have done that. You cannot let the what ifs intrude. Okay. Something will go wrong. Anticipate it. Move on with your life. Write what you plan to do. If it doesn't go according to plan, you can address that later. Start with your research problem, your research purpose, and your research questions, and ask yourself these questions. What data do I need to answer these or to address these? Who do I need to talk to find the answers? What documents will give me the answers? What observations will give me the answers? Okay, remember, think alignment. Always be thinking about alignment, problem, purpose, research questions, design, analysis, and then into, your findings. Okay, think about this as writing a recipe. You have the ingredients and the instructions. The methods are your ingredients. The instructions is your methodology. Okay, so you can't have a recipe without both parts, right? If someone says make chili, here are the ingredients. You don't know what to do with those ingredients. How much? What order? Do I need to saute the onions first? Right? So it's what you plan to do and how you plan to do it. And you want to outline it in a way that someone can read along. It makes sense to them. Your decisions make sense to them, and that could be replicated in the future. So your methods and methodology change a lot. Get comfortable with that. Okay. It's bound to happen. Think about this chapter as sort of, the expectation for your research that in the end will probably not be the reality. Okay. As things change, you can talk about what changed in later chapters. In chapter 4, in your results chapter, you can revisit how your data collection didn't go as you planned. Okay. You can talk about why, maybe that has some implication for your findings or your interpretation of your results. Okay. Maybe that presents some limitation. And so then you would revisit that in chapter 5. That's perfectly fine. Okay. So again, get comfortable with, it's not going to be exact at this point. You're outlining what you plan to do. Okay. And you're doing the best that you can to ensure that even if things change, you have a plan that aligns with and will address your problem, purpose, and research questions. So if it still feels overwhelming, and it might, that's why we're here. Okay. Again, I'm Rachel. I'm a senior qualitative research mentor here at Statistics Solutions. We are a full service dissertation consulting company, and our goal is to get you, the graduate student, finished in a timely manner, because by the time you come to us, you're probably over it. You're probably ready to be done, to move along with your life. Okay, we're here to help. Again, we provide a complimentary consultation. So you can schedule that, you can email, you can call us. Again, the information, you can use the link provided as well. We also have a ton of awesome resources on our website. We have a blog with any dissertation related topic you could possibly want, you could possibly think of. But the consultation will give us a better idea of your research, you know, hurdles that you have been experiencing, you know, just really help us get a feel for your project and your unique needs and how we can be of assistance. Okay, so we'll do some question and answers now. Let's see. So if you do have questions related to the webinar content, qualitative methods chapter, you could pop those into the question and answer box. And just to reiterate, again, each participant today will receive a copy of this webinar presentation tomorrow, as well as the slideshow. So I have a question about, okay, so I have a question from a participant about using IPA rooted in Heidegger's interpretive versus Husserl's descriptive approach. Okay, I'm also a member of the population I'm studying, even though I'm a non-participant. So the question relates to bracketing. As the researcher, how do I both bracket and also incorporate my experiential knowledge for the purpose of interpretation? So if you are using IPA rooted in Heidegger's interpretive approach, this is really, I think, probably the best if you are also a member of the population, because it does really explicitly allow you to interpret your participants. So with bracketing, bracketing is one way in phenomenology that we, for those unfamiliar, is one way that we acknowledge when we're actually conducting our research, that we acknowledge our biases. And so what you would do is talk about that, yes, you will bracket your own experiences, and it may be a little bit more, it may feel a little bit more like journaling or something like that. You may find as a member of the population that you are reflecting a little bit more on, you know, what you're learning, but, and as participants are, you know, sharing with you in interviews that you are, you know, I mean, it may be that you're finding sort of new biases or things come up that you need to address. But I would just recommend, you know, to address bracketing, you just say, you know, you will be writing about your own experiences, listing your own biases, making sure that before the interview, you sort of clear your mind as much as possible, go into the interview with an open mind, go into data analysis with an open mind. But then also, again, because it's interpretative, you know, that as a member of the population, and because, you know, the IPA is double hermeneutic. It's the participants are interpreting their experience, but you as the researcher are also interpreting their experience and their interpretation of the experience. So I think that was the long version. The short version is, in your methodology section, you talk about, yes, I am a participant, or I'm a member of this population. I will conduct bracketing. Here's what I will do. You know, I will journal, write my biases, yada, yada, but also, you know, be explicit in the interpretive component of the analysis and saying, you know, this is also based, you know, on somewhat on my experience as well. And so the lens might be a little bit different. I really like IPA, and I really like the shift toward IPA. Again, you know, I'm very much a social constructivist in my own sort of, you know, thinking and worldview. And so I like the shift to being more explicitly interpretive in our work. Are there other questions that I can help out with today? And if so, go ahead and pop those into the question and answer box. I'm seeing a lot of thank yous. It is absolutely my pleasure. This is truly why we're here. And most of us on the team here at Statistics Solutions have been in this spot. So we truly get it. We understand what it's like. We've lived it, the ups and the downs and the goods and the bads. Let's see, I've got a couple more questions. I need to get a couple things cleared here. Okay, so question about advice regarding how to conduct a case analysis. A few personal interviews that have been transcribed to words. I'm probably going to need more information than that to be able to point you in the right direction. I don't have a whole lot to go off of here, other than if you're looking at something for data analysis of the case, I often recommend thematic analysis as one to look into. Recommended methods books. So good starting points, I think, are Cresswell. Often schools won't let you reference Cresswell because it's more of a textbook as opposed to sort of a scholarly source, but it's a very good starting point. And then other methods books that can be helpful, authors Yin, Y-I-N, Stake, S-T-A-K-E are very helpful for case studies. IPA, Larkin, Smith are some of the names there. But, I generally recommend starting with sort of a basic overview of methods and then drilling down a little bit deeper once you kind of identify what is going to make the most sense for your study. Bernard has a good one for qualitative designs. It's a little bit more geared toward ethnography, but I find it to actually be a very helpful overview of qualitative research in general. So if we don't know a lot, okay, got another question about, would it be permissible if the problem is a lack of knowledge about a certain phenomenon? Yes, that would take a qualitative study. There are different ways to go about that. It might mean a grounded theory study. It might mean a gap analysis, which is a whole other kind of design. But yes, you can certainly, we conduct studies when we don't know a whole lot. Oftentimes someone will say, we need more research on this. So there's your sort of problem and lack of knowledge. Let's see. We do not, no, we only provide this. This is internet based. And you will get a copy of the presentation tomorrow. So you'll get one if you came in late as well. Okay, so again, I am Rachel, a senior qualitative research mentor at Statistics Solutions. If you want to get in touch with us to talk more about your specific project, you can do that using info@statisticsolutions.com. You can give us a call, 877-437-8622. You can also go to our website and get yourself scheduled for a complimentary consultation to find out more about our services, pricing, and how we can help out. So I appreciate everyone attending today. No matter where in the world you're from, what time of day it is, I hope that you have a great rest of your afternoon, and do look for our upcoming webinars on other dissertation related topics on our website. Thanks so much. Take care. Bye-bye.